Ed's fallen on his sword. It's as simple as that. His position became untenable. He was perceived to be a leading light in this breakaway. He shattered the trust which he had with UEFA.
I'm joined by Laurie Whitwell and Andy Mitten. We're talking about what happened over the last 24 hours, what might happen to Manchester United now Ed Woodward has resigned, and possibly what could the future of football look like. I would recommend readers to go to The Athletic, check out a new piece from Dominic Fifield and a number of our journalists about how the Super League collapsed. I would also suggest a brand new piece done by Adam Crafton about essentially how the Super League gambled very, very hard that they could push through fan apathy and could retain stakeholders, but they lost every single stakeholder possible. And now we are going to enter an interesting new state of football. One that will not have Ed Woodward as the chief executive of Manchester United. Laurie, that was another grenade into yesterday evening's events.
Yeah. Obviously, I was working on one piece, mainly, how this was all sort of collapsing. And within that, it was sort of in the afternoon, and someone said to me, I think Ed Woodward might resign over this. And an agent, even on the Monday, had said, if this doesn't happen, how does he continue? Because of the way that there'd been secrecy from both the ownership, even within the structure of the club. So, I think the first email that actually went around internally at the club to staff was to say, we're pulling out of the Super League. There was no kind of, big debrief to staff, or anything like that. And also then to the players, the secrecy, and the manager. So there's a level of mistrust there between all these really important factors. And then aside from that, the venom that was pouring out of executive counterparts at other Premier League clubs, that became very apparent in the Premier League meeting yesterday, and was being spoken about beforehand privately, by these clubs. They felt betrayed, they felt lied to, they felt Ed Woodward had been a ringleader for these kind of changes coming in, and they were determined that if United came back to the Premier League, as they expected they would do, that they wanted punishment, and they wanted punishment against individuals. And it would have just been a very, very difficult situation for Ed Woodward to go back into. Now, as Andy's alluded to, I think we'll get onto it. You hear different competing stories. One aspect that has emerged, one version, is that Ed Woodward didn't really support the Super League proposal, and he did give UEFA his word in good faith that he'd signed up to their reforms, which Andrea Agnelli pushed through it. And Seferin, the UEFA president, called him out in strong terms. He called him a snake. It's not and he then clarified it a little bit later in a CNN interview with Darren Lewis, who's a really good interview. And he sort of explained it as, well, maybe that was a bit strong, but listen, snakes are people that we don't expect. They come out and they bite you when you least expect it. They're sort of hiding. And that's how the perception of what Ed Woodward had done was amongst his peers. And so how do you then go back to the negotiation table and sit around a boardroom and try and come to some collaboration on behind closed doors matches or anything, that's perhaps more trivial than such a macro issue such as this?
I want to direct any viewers and subscribers to The Athletic to a new column from Daniel Taylor, where he simply says failure would be Ed Woodward's legacy. Laurie, you've also written a piece. You managed to find an extra bit of time to write a piece that says, it carries a quote from a recent Manchester United player that says, Ed Woodward is a great marketing man, but terrible at football. He's always been a controversial figure at Manchester United. One of the big terms used against him was he's not a quote unquote football man.
Yeah.
That's a big void at Manchester United left. What do you think happens next?
Don't know. I mean, I think the fact of this is, that, United might say that it was planned and they just brought the announcement forward. There's no way resignation happens 48 hours after the European Super League, and the European Super League isn't a factor in it. It's basically the definitive factor. So I don't think there's any, suggestion of a plan in place, a kind of any kind of appointment ready to go. So it's a bit of a question as to what happens next. I mean, they say that Ed Woodward will work until the end of 2021, which is a bit odd, I suppose, not doing it at the end of the season or even right now. I mean, there's some people that are saying to me, why would you stay around? Why can you even stay around? How will that manifest itself in your working patterns? You go in and you've got all this, turmoil that's been created by, something that you've been a part of. How can you actually stay on? So that'll be interesting to see. I guess from United's perspective, they will say that is a way to ensure a smooth transition for whoever next gets the job. And I suppose I'd only be speculating, but my gut would be that they would, perhaps appoint internally, someone that they trust. Ed Woodward was their guy from the banking world. He was the one who managed to find the numbers that made their leverage takeover of Manchester United work at JP Morgan. I think he was, an employee at JP Morgan who no one thought it kind of gave him this task in a way that wasn't really, perceived as being doable, feasible. And he managed to do it. It's not like he was some high flying executive and they poached him from there. So he's grown with them, and he's got their trust absolutely. And I think they would go for someone, of a similar ilk. Richard Arnold is the one in my mind that, has the same commercial credentials as Ed Woodward, probably more so. I think he's probably driven the commercial expansion of Manchester United more than Ed Woodward, with some of the deals that he's made. And he is, quite a big personality, quite a person that demands quite a lot when you speak to people that have worked with him previously. He doesn't have a football background. He is a rugby fan. Which is, something that Ed Woodward, I think, mainly grew up supporting. But that, I don't think that would be a factor for them, because Manchester United's commercial revenue is such a large stream of the business. So, why not get the guy who's got the most expertise in commercial to kind of run that club? And you look at then the John Murtagh situation. He is someone who was very trusted by Ed Woodward, therefore Joel Glazer, you've got that lineage there. He's more on the football side of things. He was appointed just before all this happened. You sort of look back at that set of appointments and think, I wonder if Ed Woodward knew this Super League thing was coming and it could end in tears, and maybe he wanted to get something positioned in just as a bit of an insurance policy in advance. We'll see in time, I suppose. Cliff Beattie is another name. He's the chief financial operator. He's on the investor calls, just as Ed Woodward and Richard Arnold are. So he knows the club inside out. He's a Newcastle fan. He's a proper Geordie, I'm led to believe. So, he understands, this kind of thing about football guy, I suppose, is an easy thing to target at people. I'm not necessarily sure that you have to be someone that's, grown up supporting the club to be in the higher echelons. But for sure, I think if you look back at Ed Woodward's time, a lot of what he did was learning on the job, and you felt he was quite starry-eyed in moments. He made a lot of mistakes in terms of contracts that he handed out. Maybe by now he's got to a point where he's comfortable, he understands the dynamic, and you've seen that with the recruitment seems to be okay. Although I suppose you could look at the David De Gea contract as perhaps a bit of a misstep, although the cost that it would have taken to buy a new goalkeeper at that moment, when you couldn't necessarily rely on Dean Henderson, they didn't know that he was going to emerge into this kind of role. You can understand the sort of different pressures there. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a bit of a shock that it actually happened, that he actually said, right, I'm going. I think there's a certain I suppose there's a certain correctness about that aspect, given the uproar that this has all caused. But yeah, it was a very late session last night. It's one of those where you sort of work all day thinking, is this really true? I dismissed it. When you first hear that suggestion, you sort of dismissed it and think, why would he resign? He's the Glazers guy. He's not going anywhere. He's the one that's leading this, if anything. But as Andy mentioned there, when Pep speaks out against it, I mean, and Man City kind of get behind that, you're thinking this could crumble, and that obviously then made more sense. And the kind of confirmation comes later in the evening, and they had to wait for the New York Stock Exchange to officially announce it, which is obviously something that always grates United fans. Yeah, and the stock price, the stock price that had gone up after this announcement happened, then plummets. And again, that's something to consider. Avram Glazer sold his shares last month, sort of 80 odd million pounds worth. You sort of wonder where his thinking was with that move, in hindsight. So yeah, lots of questions. I mean, people have asked. I think we've got a question from one of the listeners about who next. Could it be an external appointment? I mean, Edwin van der Sar is what Hampus has asked on Twitter. I mean, listen, I'd love Edwin van der Sar to come and work for Manchester United, because I think he is a smart, erudite guy who understands football, but also understands the business of football, and clearly, you know, he has relationships with Manchester United, Matt Judge, through the negotiations for Donny van de Beek last summer. But I would be surprised if that's the route they went down, just because I feel like it'll be someone that they know and trust and you know, have basically control over.
Ed Woodward talked about the importance of communicating with fans, and then flew in the face of that when this came out and nobody had a clue of it. I mean, there was a fans forum meeting on Friday and none of the people there, and I've spoke to them, got told anything. So there might be apologies subsequently. Yeah, I'm sorry, we couldn't say anything about that. And obviously you wouldn't expect fans to be leaked a story as big as this. It would come through other channels. And there's been a lot of progress with the communication between fans and Manchester United. There's a lot of good people at the club as well. You know, United did a lot of good things right in lockdown, especially compared to other clubs. You know, they didn't furlough the staff. They were well aware of the importance of the club in the community. There was a good dialogue with supporters. But this is the big job. And how do the people on the football side, because it was just feeling like the football side was getting right. You know, they're doing well. United are doing well. Ollie's doing a decent job. I think Darren Fletcher is absolutely an addition there. John Murtagh started the job. Let's see how he does. But I think it's getting on track. Now, clearly, they need to be back. There needs to be money. United need to strengthen in the summer. It's all right being second. United want to be first. You've got to be bringing in top class players. It's all right saying that there's an 18-year-old who's really promising for now. I know that there's concern that some of them players might not be ready for 3 or 4 or 5 years, if they're ready at all. There's no guarantees. Whereas you've got a Haaland who's ready now. So United need to recruit well, appoint the right man to replace Ed Woodward. As Laurie said, I'd be surprised now if he stayed until the end of the year. It just seems so odd if he's there at the end of November making key decisions when everybody knows that he's going. And he's fallen on his sword. It is as simple as that.
Could anything change above Ed Woodward's level? What happens next for Manchester United and their relationship with the Glazer family? You've been reporting for the last 15 hours or so. Is there any inkling one way or the other in terms of Manchester United club ownership right now?
I think the question fans are asking is, what about the Glazers now? What happens? And I think I've been asking to people who know far more than I do on this, and one of them said to me, the Glazer upside plan has now vanished. This idea of this European Super League, this absolute golden pot at the end of the rainbow. And it has been a rainbow for them because they've taken a lot of money out of Manchester United. That has now gone. The idea of noise putting them off, well, it never has done before. They've weathered the storm of protest before, most significantly in 2005 and 2010. I was also told if government get involved, that becomes a major issue. Suddenly, they've got to go up against governance. So from the point of view of Abu Dhabi and Manchester City, not wanting to go into conflict with the UK government because they've got their soft power reasons, it's very different from an American commercial perspective, because suddenly they see roadblocks ahead because British government wants to stymie the influence of what is effectively a private public company. So these big American investors, they don't tend to go to Germany, for example, because they can't go to Germany. I know someone who looked at a major club in Germany recently and they walked away because they'd basically be buying something they felt that they couldn't control. Whether the Glazers, and they still have absolute control. They're the ones who would have to decide, do we want to sell this? Do we want to talk to people who might be interested? What if there is a plan B? Where does that plan B come in? Is it funded by Qatar, Abu Dhabi, China? Is it anchored by Saudi Arabia? Is that better than the current model? Is it better if a venture capitalist comes in? Aren't they going to want exactly the same thing? Stan Kroenke or the family at Liverpool, Fenway Sports Group, they're not that different. They might have had more or less success, but they're not that different. I love the idea, and maybe I'm being idealistic, of a Manchester United owned by the fans. I think if there was shares given, there'd be a huge uptake, even if those shares were brought from the Glazers and there was genuine fan power. Even then, I've got my suspicions, because I always saw the Barcelona model as being a panacea. And then I saw it close at hand, and you have a problem with it, a major problem. That's human beings and egos. So I'm very doubtful when people last year were saying Saudi. I looked Ed Woodward in the eye and I asked him, when we're allowed to meet face to face, what about Saudi Arabia? And he dismissed it. And I think he was probably right there. I don't think he was lying to me. And I think there was wishful thinking on behalf of some United fans that Saudi would come in. But I don't like this benefactor model. Manchester United do not need a benefactor. Manchester United are big enough by themselves to fund themselves, to buy the best players in the world, to certainly be competitive. The problem comes when the club is in debt, when you've got dividends being paid out, and you've got an ownership which has never been popular. But they are still the owners. They still have control. They decide to walk away with their ball. That's up to them. Now you sense that there is a momentum there. They may walk away from it. They make an absolute fortune if they did. So I think a lot of fans would just be like, good riddance. You've had your fun. You've made your money. Go away now. And there's lots of different factors in there, but I think it's still very, very tricky. Where would the money come from? You had a group of people gathered 10, 11 years ago, and some of them with serious wealth. Not enough wealth to buy outright Manchester United. We're talking 3-4 billion here. I think the Glazers paid, 600 million?
Mm-hmm.
More,
but you would get people who would bring in considerable amounts of money, but you'd still then need uptake from others. I think that could easily come from the fans. I think if you said tomorrow, there's a share offering for Manchester United where there's genuine power rather than diluted votes, you'd get massive global uptake. It would be very, very different from 1991 when the club's share allocation wasn't taken. I'm actually speaking to Martin Edwards tomorrow, who was the man in charge. Not about the shares, not about the Super League, about something completely different. But he was a man in charge at the time when United couldn't even sell the shares when they first went public.
They say the best apology is changed behaviour. Andy, do you think Manchester United might have some changed behaviour in the weeks to come?
You'd like to think so, but some damage has been done. You mentioned Everton. Everton were right to be furious. Everton were one of the big five in the 1980s, not Manchester City, not Chelsea, which shows that nothing is permanent in football. I think in terms of punishments now, I think it would be very fair now if the Premier League said to Manchester City, you're docked 8 points. To Manchester United, you're not allowed fans in the Stretford End for your next home game. And that would be a punishment. Liverpool, I think they say, you've suffered enough this season. You're 13 points behind Manchester United. Tottenham, I mean, Tottenham haven't won a trophy since, 1878?
1961 is when I found out, which is
and Arsenal are ninth. And Arsenal are ninth. So, they've not had. So, yeah, I mean, look, take 8 points off City. Let's be fair to everyone. I'm not sure how the league table would then look. And ban Manchester United from having fans in the Stretford End for their next home match. I think that's fair all round, isn't it? I'm sure all my City mates will totally agree with me there.
Yeah. I think if the Super League, one of the big complaints about the Super League was the lack of competition. I think 8 points would help some competition, another competition, shall we say?
Is that you throwing your hat into the ring there, Andy, for replacing Ed Woodward at the negotiation table?
Yeah, you just go straight in there and say, look, 8 points off City. And now I'm just looking at that would mean actually Manchester United would be level with City with 6 games to play. That'd be exciting. You could sell that. You could double your Sky packages and sell them. For,
yeah.
I wouldn't want to play you at Monopoly, I'll tell you that.